What's up, divers? Welcome into Deep Dive Fantasy Football, and I bring sad news. I do, because we as a fantasy football community are way overvaluing DK Metcalf in Dynasty. His Fantasy Pros ECR, that's expert consensus ranking, right now for Dynasty at the wide receiver position is third best. He is the third ranked wide receiver in Dynasty right now, and that is way too high. Way too high. And I'm going to tell you why I believe so. I have plenty of evidence to support it, so stay with me here. And if you have DK Metcalf, you should look into shopping because his value is not going to be higher than it is right now. I mean, it can't get better than wide receiver 3. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the situation that we've had in Seattle this season. This season, Seattle has had a trash defense, the worst defense they've had in probably the entire career of Russell Wilson. And Seattle, because of the trash defense and because of the lack of an effective run game, which is also off-brand for Seattle, both having a good run game and having a good defense are right on brand for Seattle, and that has not been the case this season, right? Both of those things have been gone, which has forced them to pass the ball more, and that is part of the big reason. That's one of the biggest reasons DK has had such a good year, but that's not what we can expect moving forward. All right, I looked at Russell Wilson's stats. He has not missed a game in his entire NFL career. So when we're looking at Seattle, we can actually just look at Russell Wilson for the passing game, and this season for Russell Wilson was his highest pass attempts of his entire career since 2012. Since 2012, what is that, eight seasons now? Russell Wilson has never thrown the ball as much as he did this season, right? He also has never thrown as many touchdowns as he had done this season. He threw 40 this year, highest that he's ever thrown. He also had the second highest yardage in pass yardage that he's ever had in his career this year, and he's had the highest completions this year that he has ever had in his career. So we're looking at career marks in touchdowns, career marks in pass attempts, career marks in completion, a second best career mark in yardage. And that is a huge factor, a huge thing that has played into why DK Metcalf has been so good. And why has he had to pass the ball that much? Why has he had to throw that many touchdowns? Because their run game was really rough with Chris Carson being hurt throughout the season, Carlos Hyde being hurt throughout the season, all of those things. Plus, like we talked about, their defense has been really bad. So that's why he's had to throw the ball and do as much in the pass game as he had done this season. But what about, Brandon, why is it changing? Why is it changing if that's what they did this year? Why can't we expect that in the future? One, their defense is going to get better. All right? They don't have a first-round draft pick. They're not like one of the teams with a bunch of cap space, but I don't see how their defense could, one, get worse, and they don't have any like marquee free agents that are up that could leave. So their defense is not going to get worse than it is. Over time, it will get better. Plus, their run game, if they re-sign Chris Carson, which shouldn't be an expensive contract, or if Rashad Penny comes back healthy, or whatever the case may be, their run game should be better as well. Plus, even if everything was the exact same as it was this season, if you look at the end of this season, they went right back to their brand. They did. Russ was cooking for the first 10 games, right? Well, in the first 10 games of the season, Russell Wilson was averaging almost 38 pass attempts per game. If you look at the last 6 games, when it's crunch time, they're trying to save their record. They're trying to get into the playoffs. Even if you look at what they did in the playoffs when they lost to the Rams. The last 6 games, Russell Wilson dropped from 38 pass attempts per game just about to 33 pass attempts per game. That's a 5 pass difference. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal over the course of a 16-game season. You're talking 80 passes difference, right? Quick math. Got you. And then, other than that, he also dropped huge in the touchdown department. The first 10 games, he was averaging 3.1 touchdowns per game. The last 6 games, 1.7. This is way closer to the career that Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks have had in the pass game. And they showed that they were trying to get right back to it in the end of the season. Why would that not continue, right? If their defense gets better, if their run game gets better, that's even more reason that it would continue. And DK Metcalf was the wide receiver 7 on this year. He was wide receiver 9 by points per game. He was the wide receiver 7 on this year in a year where Russell Wilson threw the most touchdowns he's ever thrown, the most passes he's ever thrown, completed the most passes he's ever thrown. And DK Metcalf was only wide receiver. Yes, that's really high, but if we're ranking him at 3, then I'm going to use the word only. He was only wide receiver 7, wide receiver 9 by points per game. All of those things are going to go down. Every single one of those things is going to go down. And DK is not going to be a 150 target guy. He got 130 targets this year. I believe that 130 targets is pretty close to his max. He had 10 touchdowns. That's pretty close to his max. He's not somebody that you're just throwing, fade balls to. He's not Devontae Adams or Mike Evans. He's a guy that wins with speed and physicality, yes. But he's not just like this jump ball master. He's definitely not that. So when you're looking at DK Metcalf and people are ranking him as wide receiver 3, he will not ever be a top 3 receiver on a single season in fantasy football, because I don't see the Seahawks ever being in a situation where they're passing the ball over 600 times. And some of you guys are like, bro, Tyler Lockett's leaving. DK Metcalf is going to get 150, 160 targets. No, that's not the case, because Tyler Lockett is, one, not a high volume guy. He does not get a lot of targets. So he doesn't really hurt DK in terms of target potential. And what he does do for DK, because he's also a fast guy and a guy who threatens the defense, he opens things up. It's harder to guard DK. If you take Lockett away, right? Lockett's, I think, 28 right now, going on 29. If you take Lockett away, it's way easier for defenses to guard DK Metcalf. And we've seen that DK Metcalf, yes, it was Jalen Ramsey, one of the best corners in the league, but he is not the guy that can just beat out a defense when they're focusing on him. He's not that guy, especially if Lockett's gone. Even when we're not talking about a Jalen Ramsey type player, we could be talking about, an average corner, but if they're doubling DK because there's no Lockett there, that's not going to be a good situation for him. So there's no way in my mind that DK Metcalf will ever be a top 3 receiver, 1. 2, okay, yes, the age, that's part of the reason why he's up there high in Dynasty rankings. That's fine. There are plenty of good receivers with way more potential than DK Metcalf that are very young. So overall, this was the career high marks for the Seattle passing offense and Russell Wilson in terms of attempts, touchdowns, all these things. And DK Metcalf was only wide receiver 7, wide receiver 9 by points per game. That's probably his ceiling. And right now, look, even if you think DK Metcalf is great, I don't know, there's a fly in here. Even if you think DK Metcalf is great, right? That's fine. He can be great. He's my wide receiver 8 in Dynasty, okay? I like DK Metcalf a lot. But right now, if I had him, I'm selling him. Selling him for A.J. Brown, straight up. Chris Godwin, straight up. Trying to think of some other good examples. Hopkins, I like to tend to stick with the young guy, so I would take him over Hopkins. And, there are other guys too. Terry McLaurin, I would consider trading him straight up for Terry McLaurin. And Justin Jefferson, I would trade him straight up for Justin Jefferson. So if you have DK Metcalf, just consider it, right? And remember your boy here, when DK Metcalf is never a top dog, like top 3, top 5 fantasy option, because he wasn't able to do that in this season, which is probably the most passes the Seattle Seahawks will be throwing in a while. So that's my case for DK Metcalf being a sell high, get him off your team. If someone wants to give you a huge overpay as if he's a top 3 receiver, because he's not, that's my case for DK Metcalf. Thanks for tuning in. Oh yeah, and okay, the editing, a little unorthodox. All right, I got it. But here's the thing. I didn't want to have to re-say all that because I hit all my points perfectly except one. And this is super important. The first 10 games, remember I was talking about Russell Wilson, first 10 games, was throwing the ball about 38 times a game, averaging 3.1 touchdowns. At that point, DK was averaging 19.5 points per game in fantasy. But then I told you they got back to their roots, right? The last 6 games, Russell Wilson was only averaging 33 pass attempts per game, 1.7 touchdowns per game. Guess what DK's average went down to in fantasy? From 19.5 to 12.5. That is not even a top 24 wide receiver. All right, now the case is shut. If you're listening to this, if you watched it, if you liked it, and you enjoy the content, I got plenty coming out just like it. So subscribe for me. I'd appreciate it. Helps me out. I just started the YouTube. But yeah, check out the podcast if you don't listen to that either. It's Deep Dive Fantasy Football, wherever you listen. Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, whatever the case may be. Have a good one, guys. Peace.